Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here, why not hit that subscribe button? Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop RPGs can sometimes get pretty intense. And when you mix that with people that can't control their emotions, that can sometimes lead to people rolling for initiative in real life. Much like what happens in the following 3 D&D horror stories. If you enjoy what I do here, consider rolling a crit on that like button. But with all of that out of the way, let's get right into the stories. The time IRL Melee broke out with a dozen players. By Reddit user, Nemenev. For several months, the comic book store me and my friends played at was closed due to tax evasion. Something common where I come from. We had a hard time finding a decent table, and we weren't willing to start a game ourselves because we were constantly fighting over DMing styles. Through another friend, we learned of a kid that was organizing a form of D&D tournament. We heard about the kid before because he had a reputation for putting together big plans with awful outcomes. To name an example, he tried to host a party with live music in a house he rented to that effect. His idea was to make it free to attend and charge for alcoholic beverages. Mind you, the kid was underage, but he managed to make the party happen. Booze and everything. It all went to shit because the neighbors called the cops, who confiscated the booze, money, and some equipment. The bands were pissed because they were not paid as promised, and one actually lost instruments and a console. I was there that night, and it was, to put it kindly, a death trap. So yeah, this kid, whom we'll call Ferguson, was quite the entrepreneur. Anyway, this D&D tourney was supposed to be a big all-nighter he was going to run in 1 or 2 tables with another DM. A dungeon with a treasure, and the party of 3 that got it first and managed to leave the area was the winner of a monetary prize. So there was a registration fee, and if your party won, you would make about 80% of the total fees collected. Me and my mates, Green and Newt, decided it was a chance to get at least some playtime in, and we spent the next 10 days coming up with a party concept that would kick ass in the dungeon crawl. The tournament was held in, I shit you not, an abandoned office building. Ferguson got his hands on a generator, which he used to light what looked like an 80s corporate conference room, with some old furniture to boot. If it wasn't all so shady, I would say that it was a perfect place for D&D. There were like 5 teams, the rules were hastily explained, and we got to business. Each party entered the dungeon from a different random entrance, and we'd have to explore, and, if we bumped into another party, PvP was allowed and encouraged. We wound up all playing under the same table, ran by Ferguson. His associate, whom we'll call Hogface, was doing rounds, checking the sheets and making sure no one was being dishonest. The game was played in turns, and the dungeon consisted in what seemed like endless rooms connected by passages. In each of its turns, each party would get to explore a room and, if possible, choose a passage to take. It quickly became apparent that one of the parties was favored by Ferguson. They were getting easier puzzles or fights and better loot. This party already killed another when they crossed paths in a room. Another party was doing extremely well too. Can't remember the characters for the life of me, but I knew one of the players from the comic book store. We'll call him Begbie, because when I saw Trainspotting for the first time, I saw a lot of Robert Carlyle's character in this guy. Begbie had 3 moods: depressive, euphoric, and destructive. Up until now, Begbie was euphoric. His team, that included his girlfriend and another dude, was doing fine. They were using their resources well and seemed ready to face any sort of danger. At a certain point, my party was killed. Nothing unfair here, just bad luck and decisions, I guess. Green left, but Newt and I decided to stick around to see what happened with Begbie. Another team died before mine, so there were Begbie's team and 2, maybe 3 others left. Among them was the team that Ferguson clearly favored, which we'll call Team Fave. At a certain point, another team found the treasure room, but had a tough fight there and only 1 player survived, forced to flee without the prize, so he resigned. Team Fave started finding obvious clues that pointed them towards the treasure room. Ferguson sprung the most bullshit trap on Begbie's team, and they had to use a lot of their resources to keep in shape. In the next room, Ferguson declared that Begbie's team and Team Fave bumped into each other. Team Fave was in an advantageous position due to the bullshit trap. Ferguson, as DM, said as much to Team Fave and pretty much suggested they should attack. Combat ensued. Begbie's party was good. They always seemed to make the right choice. This helped even the odds, and a few rounds later each team lost a member. Finally, it was 1v1. Begbie versus one of Fave's guys. They were both in bad shape. Fave threw something at Begbie, a spell I think, but failed. Begbie went for the kill, but Ferguson made him roll a check. Begbie rolled fairly well, but Ferguson declared that he'd activated a trap that killed him. At that point, there were close to 20 people in the room. We were watching the fight intently. When we heard Ferguson mention the trap, there was silence. I think we all knew at the time that something was up. Begbie started arguing with Ferguson. Hogface, who was standing behind Fave's survivor, joined the argument. A player from the other party that was killed earlier began questioning Fave's resources. He was apparently keeping track somehow. Ferguson told Hogface to check the sheet from Fave's survivor to keep things fair. Hogface took a glance and said everything was fine. Begbie and Ferguson kept arguing. Team Fave slowly moved away from the table, not wanting to get involved. Things got heated and swoosh. Begbie's girlfriend took the sheet from Hogface's hand. Hogface grabbed her by the ear and Begbie went berserk. Punch, punch, Hogface was down. Everything went to shit right there. Hogface's friends jumped in. Other players joined the fight as well, while others, myself included, tried to make our way out. Newt decided to join #Team Begbie and told me the rest of the story later that night. Newt was an unreliable narrator, so I'm sure about 50% of the rest of this is plain old BS. For instance, I'm sure he exaggerated his participation in the fight because he didn't look like he was in a scuffle at all. His hair, his pride and joy, looked clean and as tidy as always. I'll just tell what I remember he said and we can split the difference. The fight was a mess. About half the people left and the other half stayed. So it was like 10 to 12 people involved in the melee. Ferguson tried to escape with the money, but the player saw him and held him, while Hogface's friends were dealing with Begbie's crew. Begbie's girlfriend took a hit and fell to the floor, covering her face. At that point, everything stopped. She was literally the only girl present and was under 18, so I guess everyone got scared. However, the verbal argument continued, and from what Newt could gather, at some point one of Team Fave spilled the beans. Ferguson was to make sure Team Fave won, and in return he'd get a cut, effectively doubling his profit. Hogface was in on it too. Typical Ferguson. So the players got pissed, took the money from Ferguson, and split it between the teams. Fortunately, there was no more violence, mainly because Begbie wanted to get his girlfriend out of there. So Ferguson was a walking horror story, and I wouldn't be surprised if today he's a life coach, gives TED Talks, or is in jail. Or dead. Good news is, I got my money back, which was redirected to Burger King and the arcades in the following days. I Met That Guy nearly 20 years ago, by Reddit user Error1985. I've been into D&D since my teens and was DMing for a group at a local war games club on a weekly basis. This is back in the early noughties, 01 to 02 I think. D&D 3.5e was our game of choice mostly, with some occasional vampire. Group was me, DM, male 16. Player 1, male 16. Player 2, male 18ish. Player 3, male 25ish. Player 4, female 25ish. And Player 5, male 45ish. This story will focus on Player 5, also referred to as that guy, leaving out the physical description, in this case unpleasant but unfair to judge someone on. He still left a lot to be desired and someone to share a gaming table with. He had terrible breath, heavy smoker, talked a lot about his porn collection, and wore pseudo-military garb, despite having never actually served. Others at the club who'd known him since his teens told me this. That guy also loved a good rules lawyer interjection, even though he was frequently wrong and was very much a play-to-win kind of guy. He also basically only ever played one character, a dual-wielding metal bikini-wearing Amazonian warrior, woman Mary Sue. He particularly liked to focus on describing her breasts. Most of these I'd categorize as yellow flags. The red flags came later during play. So the first red flag was his character. The first session we all rolled stats and somehow he rolled 3 18s and nothing below a 14. Curiously, nobody saw him roll these. He liked to pick up his dice as soon as they landed and announce an almost always good result. A few weeks later, I was glancing at his character sheet during a pause in play and I noticed that his strength now said 20. I called him on it and he said something about bringing the wrong character sheet, and was back next week with the same sheet but edited back down to 18. He continued his make it up as you go along dice rolls, occasionally announcing a low roll, usually because we'd all caught on and had taken to watching him like a hawk, and I think he knew it. He'd almost always get a good result when everyone rolled at the same time for something. Funny that. So eventually, after the game one night, I decided to speak to him about it, away from the others. He denied it, but went very defensive, and the next few weeks he seemed to have stopped doing it. I patted myself on the back. Well done, problem solved. Nope, he turned up the next week with a nice new set of dice. He always used them, never let anyone else use them, never left them out on the table, and almost always rolled well. I'm sure you know where this is going. I suspected very quickly, but confirmed it when I noticed that the 19 was next to the 20, then upon further inspection, realized that the majority of the 10 plus numbers were on the same side of the dice. This time, I didn't take the discussion away from the table. I just waited until he rolled it and snatched it up. Had a quick look to confirm, then passed it all around the table before telling player 5 to find another game to play. He got quite angry, packing his things away while swearing profusely that I ran a shit game, probably true at that time, and that he wasn't going to be told what to do by a kid, while leaving my game like he had been told to do by a kid. He left, and we all carried on playing for another few years before I left for university. We'd sometimes see him glowering across the village hall at us, but he never spoke to me again after that. This is how my problem player's character died and police got involved. By Reddit user, Your Guy Rye. So I started running Tomb of Annihilation for some friends. All was well, aside from problem player. We'll call him by his character name. Unga Makuka Bunga. Yes, that was his player character's name. Unga was a dragonborn wizard with 11 intelligence. You read correctly, 11 intelligence. He actually had a reasonable backstory as to why. Due to his old age, his mind started to wander and drift, eventually turning into dementia, and thus his youthful intelligence was dramatically failing. I even wrote to him for an hour, expressing I'd love to make a small side journey for him in the party, to find a relic around level 10 or so, that would give him back his intelligence. 22 is what I set it to. But alas, this is where the story begins. Session 1. He decides to initially start the campaign by throwing rocks at our halfling. Everyone notices and questions him as to why. Because I can, he replies. Okay. We all shrugged it off and moved on to Syndra's manor when called in. He proceeds to try and cast a spell on Syndra, to which I have her bind him with a spell as a legendary reaction. I know that's not how it works, but he tried to cast Hideous Laughter on her, and I wanted to prevent a TPK day 1. After some back and forth RP talking with the player characters, they get teleported to Port Nyanzaru. Unga immediately starts to throw rocks at some children in the streets, to which a guard sees and tells him not to cause trouble. He retorts with, yet again, trying to cast a spell on the guard. I let him cast Fiend on the guard and get out of trouble for this instance. Later on, the same guard finds him roaming around aimlessly. He split from the party to break into houses, and the guard proceeds to bang him over the head with a gauntlet and drag him back to us. Session 1 ends here. Can you tell I'm trying to not have him derail so hard the story falls apart? Session 2. Finally, after so much derailment from him, they get a guide and head off. This is where he shows his true idiocy. Night falls, and I roll random encounter, and it comes up as a yes. For zombies. Initiative is rolled, and Unga is going to be second after the paladin. Unga's turn comes, and proceeds to cast Disguise Self, and look like undead attacking the camp. Did he tell the PCs? Nope. The guide? Nope. Our cleric, the halfling, was asleep when combat started, so she for sure didn't see it happen. I had her roll initiative at the top of the turn order, and she ended up getting higher than the paladin. So she comes out, half asleep and minorly drunk. She bought some of the tej at the market, saw a quote, undead beside her tent, and proceeded to cast inflict wounds. Yes, I know. Necrotic damage against an undead, but to her credit, her character was just being woken up in a panic, and still coming down from being drunk. So she did the first thing she thought of in a panic state. She hit and proceeded to do 26 necrotic damage to Unga. He was dead, right on the spot. No save, nothing. Because he only had 9 HP, she did almost 3 times his max HP in one attack, making it a savage attack, I think it's called. I'm not sure, I almost never see them occur. Due to the death curse of Tomb of Annihilation, Unga was dead forever. After this attack killed him, the player himself got very angry at us for, quote, ganging up on him and trying to kill him since we started playing. He literally flipped the table we had in the game store, sending miniatures, terrain miniatures, and buildings and houses flying, breaking a few of the store's items we borrowed and were allowed to use. He punched me in the gut, then tore hell out of the store once a worker saw the commotion happening. Police were called, camera surveillance was reviewed, and he was apprehended not too far from the store. He lived over 2 hours away and I was his only ride. Carpooling. I didn't press charges, but the store did for the vandalism he caused and banned him for life from this location, and all other locations they have in the city. So yeah, this was an interesting Friday to say the least. The other players are more than happy that we not only ejected him from the campaign, but also from our friend group. We have another session planned for this Friday, and I'm looking forward to it, instead of dreading it. That first story was pretty wild if you ask me. An underground D&D tournament? Sounds like something you would see in an obscure 80s movie. And the one with Unga flipping the table and punching OP in the gut just goes to show that there are people out there that just can't control their emotions. Have you ever encountered a player that got violent due to something in-game? If so, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Also, if you have a story you would like to share, feel free to link it in the comments or post it to the channel subreddit r/DnD Doge. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter. I'd like to thank you for watching. As always, I appreciate all of you and hope all your rolls are natural 20s. Catch you next time.